5 world records, 19 minutes, 0 turnovers. And then her own coach left her name off the starting lineup the very next game. That's not a rumor. That's not a narrative being pushed by fans who are upset about playing time. That's what actually happened, captured on film, confirmed in a press conference, and backed by FIBA's own record books. And when you lay out every piece of it in order, the stats, the film, the body language, the press conference answers, and what Puerto Rico's coaching staff did in response to one player, the picture that forms is impossible to look away from. So that's exactly what we're going to do. No filler, no fluff, just everything that happened in sequence and what it actually means. Let's start from the very beginning. When Caitlin Clark stepped off the bench against Senegal in her very first senior national team game, nobody in that arena, nobody watching at home, nobody in the FIBA press box fully understood what they were about to witness. She wasn't starting. She was coming in off the bench in her debut on the international stage against a team that was prepared for her. None of that slowed her down for a single second. 17 points, 12 assists, 0 turnovers, 4 of 5 from 3, 5 of 5 from the free throw line, and she did all of it in 19 minutes. Not a full game, not even close to a full game. 19 minutes off the bench in her very first senior national team appearance, and the performance was so statistically unusual that FIBA had to go digging through decades of international basketball records just to figure out what category to put it in. What they found was that no category existed yet. She had gone somewhere nobody had gone before. 5 separate world records broken in the same night by the same player in her very first game wearing a senior national team jersey. Record 1, most assists by any player in a Team USA senior national team debut, men or women, not in a generation, not in a recent era, in the entire history of USA basketball, from the first time the program sent players to international competition to the night Clark walked onto that floor. Nobody had ever distributed the basketball at that level in a debut appearance. Record 2, most assists in any senior national team debut across all countries. This one goes further. She didn't just top the American record, she topped the entire world's list. Every country, every player, every debut in FIBA history, every player who ever suited up for their national team for the first time and tried to make an impression, Clark's night in that gym sat above all of them when the research was complete. Record 3, second most assists in FIBA qualifying tournament history. 1 game in, her very first appearance in the tournament, and she was already sitting in the conversation with the best single-game assist performances the entire qualifying format had ever produced. Not second on the American list, second in the history of the tournament across every nation that had ever played in it. Record 4, most assists by any bench player in FIBA history, men or women. She wasn't even in the starting lineup. She came off the bench, stepped onto the floor with the second unit, and still did something that no bench player in international basketball history had ever done before. The players who had logged more minutes, who had started, who had been given every advantage in terms of positioning and preparation, none of them had ever hit the number Clark hit coming off the bench. Record 5, 8 assists in the first half alone with 0 turnovers, the highest first half assist total in qualifying game history. Before halftime, she had already set a record that covered the full span of the tournament's history, and she had done it before the teams even went to the locker room. 5 records, 19 minutes, 0 turnovers. And the building knew something historic was happening long before the final numbers were calculated. But what happened next In the days that followed, in the starting lineup decisions, on the film, and behind a press conference microphone, is what makes this story more than just a great debut. Because the way Team USA responded to one of the most historically significant individual performances in international basketball history tells you everything about the environment Clark was walking into, and it was not what anyone who watched that Senegal game would have expected. Before the records were confirmed, before any analyst had run the comparisons, the arena in Puerto Rico was already sending a signal that the people inside it could feel in real time. Packed. Not decent attendance, not a respectable crowd for an international qualifier. Packed. People had lined up outside that gym specifically because Caitlin Clark was in it. Fans who had tracked her college career, her WNBA rookie season, her rise into a figure that was impossible to ignore, they showed up in numbers that international qualifying tournaments almost never produce. And they showed up because of one name on the roster. FIBA's own broadcast crew recognized what was happening before tip-off. They assigned a dedicated cameraman specifically to follow Clark during live plays, between plays, during timeouts, and during warm-ups. That doesn't happen for depth players. That doesn't happen for roster pieces who are there to fill out a squad. A dedicated camera follows someone when the people running the broadcast understand that a significant portion of the audience watching is primarily watching because of that one player. The opposing coach's own daughter was sitting in the stands with a fan sign that had Clark's name on it. Think about that for a moment. The coach on the other side of the court, whose job that night was to stop Caitlin Clark and send Team USA with a loss, had a family member in the building holding up a sign celebrating the player her parent was being paid to contain. That's the kind of pull that doesn't get manufactured by marketing campaigns or social media teams. It either exists or it doesn't. And in Puerto Rico, it clearly existed. Sports journalists from countries that have no WNBA team, no domestic women's basketball league of any significance, no real reason to cover an international qualifier, were filing stories about that qualifier because Clark was playing in it. Whiters in time zones that had never had a reason to stay up late for a WNBA game were awake and covering this one because the name attached to it had broken through whatever barrier usually keeps international audiences from caring about American women's basketball. People who had never watched a single WNBA game in their lives were curious. Not converted fans yet, maybe not long-time supporters, but curious. And curiosity at that scale, curiosity that crosses language barriers and time zones and decades of regional indifference, is the rarest thing in sports. Most careers end without ever generating it. Clark had generated it before she was even officially a senior national team player. So what did Team USA do with all of that momentum? What did they do with a player who had just broken 5 world records, drawn an international audience to a qualifying tournament, and made the building feel like something important was happening? They left her off the starting lineup. Starting 5 for the Puerto Rico game: Chelsea Gray, Paige Beckers, Kelsey Plum, Monique Billings, Kiki Irie Austin. No Clark. The player who had just set 5 world records in her debut, who had come off the bench in 19 minutes and done something no player in international basketball history had ever done before. She was on the bench again when the opening whistle blew against Puerto Rico, and the starting unit that took the floor without her immediately ran into problems that were visible to anyone watching the film. The pace dropped. The ball movement that had made the Senegal performance so efficient, the quick decisions, the clean reads, the ball finding the right person at the right time, slowed down almost immediately. Puerto Rico's physical defense was generating resistance, and the clean looks that a properly spaced offense should have been producing were simply not coming. Possessions were getting bogged down. The tempo that had made Team USA look dangerous was grinding towards something much more manageable for the defense on the other side. Then Clark came in with the second unit. The tempo shifted, not gradually, not over the course of a few possessions where the lineup adjustment needed time to settle in, immediately. Faster transition, better reads, more ball movement. The difference between what the offense looked like without her and what it looked like the moment she stepped onto the court was visible in real time on film for anyone who watched both games back-to-back and paid attention to how the ball was moving. But here is where the story becomes more complicated than just a rotation decision that a reasonable person might question. Because what unfolded on the floor in that Puerto Rico game, what the film actually shows when you watch it carefully, goes well beyond a coaching staff experimenting with lineups. Angel Reese looked off Caitlin Clark on at least 4 separate possessions. Not once, not twice in a game where things were moving fast and reads can genuinely get missed. 4 documented times on film, in the same game, against the same team, where Clark was doing everything right without the ball, reading the defense, creating angles, putting herself in positions where a pass would have turned into a high-percentage scoring opportunity, and Reese saw her and went the other way. The first time, you give it the benefit of the doubt. Basketball moves fast. Defenders shift at the last second. A read that looked clean for a moment can change before the pass is released, and a good player will redirect rather than force something that is closed. That is a legitimate explanation for one possession, and it is fair to offer it. By the third time, that explanation has stopped working. By the fourth, what you are watching is not a missed read. What you are watching is a decision. And decisions that happen 4 times in the same direction against the same player in the same game are not accidents, they are choices. And the choices were costing Team USA points on a consistent basis because Clark's presence behind the arc, when teammates actually use it, forces defenders to spread out in ways that open up the entire offense. When the ball stops going through her hands, when she can be ignored because her teammates are ignoring her, that defensive pressure collapses completely. The floor shrinks. The opponent's job gets easier. That's not a theory. That's basic basketball spacing, and it was showing up in the film every single time the ball bypassed Clark in a possession where she was positioned to be used effectively. And then there was the contact. After one of those sequences, after a possession where Reese had looked Clark off in a spot where the pass should have been automatic, there was a moment of physical contact between the two players. Not during a play on the ball, not in a foul situation where bodies end up in unexpected places because the game had moved in a direction nobody anticipated. Contact in a spot where there was no basketball reason for any contact to happen at all. Just a bump. In a place that made no sense given what was happening on the court around it. Clips of that moment were circulating on social media within hours of the final buzzer, not because fans were looking for drama where none existed, but because people who had been watching this dynamic develop across an entire WNBA season felt like they were watching the tension they had been tracking get confirmed on an international stage, in a Team USA jersey, in front of a global audience that had shown up specifically because Clark was playing. That is not a good look for anyone involved. And the people who watched it understood exactly what they were seeing, which is why the clips kept moving. But the Lookoffs were the most visible piece of a structural problem that ran deeper than any single possession or any single moment of contact. Because when Clark is being used correctly, when the ball is moving through her hands and defenders have to account for her behind the arc, she forces decisions that open up everyone around her. She demands attention. She pulls coverage in ways that create easier opportunities for the players cutting and posting around her. The defense cannot simply sit on other players and ignore her, because the cost of ignoring her is too high. When teammates refuse to involve her, all of that disappears. The defense gets to play a simpler game. And that simpler game was exactly what Puerto Rico's coaching staff was hoping for, except they didn't need to count on Team USA's rotation to deliver it. They had already built something specific to make sure of it. Puerto Rico ran a box-and-one hybrid defense specifically designed to keep the ball out of Caitlin Clark's hands. A box-and-one is a resource-intensive defensive scheme. It requires a player to follow one specific target everywhere on the floor, not just in their primary defensive assignment area, but everywhere, while the other 4 defenders form a zone around the paint. It is not something you run against a role player. It is not something you run against someone your scouting report has identified as manageable or containable through conventional means. You run a box-and-one when your coaching staff has looked at the film, assessed the opponent's primary threat, and concluded that the only viable path to staying in the game is to dedicate an entire defensive player to one target and hope the personnel around her can hold everything else together.
Puerto Rico was going to lose that game by 30 points, regardless of what defense they ran. Their roster was not built to compete with Team USA on even terms, and everyone in that gym understood that before the opening tip. But their coaching staff still spent preparation time, still used practice reps, still built their entire defensive structure around one player on the other side. Not the leading scorer, not the most experienced veteran in the starting lineup, the player who came off the bench. The opponent respected Caitlin Clark more than her own bench did. Sit with that for a moment. A coaching staff that was going to lose this game no matter what happened still looked at the film and decided that the single greatest threat to any chance they had of keeping the score respectable was a player their opponent's own coaching staff had decided didn't belong in the starting five. Puerto Rico's game plan was built around neutralizing someone that Team USA was treating as a second-unit piece. That contradiction between how the opposition valued Clark and how the rotation decisions reflected her teammates valuing her is the clearest summary of everything that was wrong with how she was being used in Puerto Rico. And then Carol Lawson walked up to the press conference microphone, and what she said confirmed everything the film had already been showing. Most coaches, after a performance like the one Clark put up in the Senegal game, would be careful at the microphone. The safe play is team-first language, credit spread evenly across the roster, nothing that sounds like an individual player is being elevated above the collective. That's standard coaching communication after a historic individual performance. Acknowledge it graciously, redirect the narrative back to the group, avoid giving anyone a reason to write a story about internal dynamics. Lawson went a different direction. She described her approach as being in fact-finding mode, wanting to experiment with rotations and figure out her roster. On the surface, reasonable enough. Any coach in early tournament play has legitimate reasons to test different lineup combinations and gather information before committing to a set rotation. Nobody expects a final starting five to be locked in after one game. But then she went further. She said she wanted everyone to shine, not just Caitlin Clark. Her words, the day after Clark broke 5 FIBA world records coming off the bench in 19 minutes, the day after a performance that FIBA's own records department had to spend time processing because the numbers were outside the range of anything previously documented. The framing of wanting to make sure one specific player wasn't shining too brightly delivered the morning after that player had done something no player in international basketball history had ever done before is a choice. Coaches choose their words, and that choice told you exactly what the priority hierarchy inside this program looked like from Lawson's perspective. When a reporter asked her directly about Clark's performance in the Puerto Rico game, not the Senegal game, the Puerto Rico game specifically, the one where the starting lineup decision had been made, where the offense had moved differently when Clark was on the floor, Lawson dodged it, didn't answer, pivoted away from the question entirely. A reporter asked a direct question about one player's specific performance, and the head coach of the program refused to engage with it. For a coach who had watched history get made less than 24 hours earlier and who had then made a lineup decision that kept the history maker on the bench for the opening tip, refusing to even acknowledge that player's game at the press conference is not an oversight. It is a choice. And that choice tells you exactly where Clark was sitting in this coaching staff's thinking, regardless of what the stat sheet was showing. The press conference didn't reveal an agenda by spelling it out directly. What it revealed was the combination of things that were said, the things that were deliberately not said, and the framing applied to one specific player's name when it came up in that room. Connect those pieces to the starting lineup, to the film, to the 4 documented lookoffs, to the contact moment, and to a Puerto Rican coaching staff that thought Clark was such a threat they built their defensive scheme around containing her, and the picture that forms is not complicated. It is just uncomfortable. Here is the part that matters beyond Puerto Rico, beyond the qualifier, beyond the tournament result. Clark still made Team USA better every single minute she was on the floor. Think about what that means given the context. She was coming off the bench. She was playing behind a starting unit that had been assembled without her. She was operating with teammates who were documented on film, actively choosing not to involve her in possessions where she was positioned correctly and available. She was playing against a defense specifically engineered to keep the ball out of her hands. She was facing all of that friction simultaneously, and she still shifted the tempo the moment she stepped onto the court. She still moved the ball, she still generated offense, she still made the team harder to guard when she was on the floor than when she was sitting. Now picture what she does when none of that friction exists. No rotation designed to give other players their moment at her expense, no teammates looking her off in possessions where the pass should be automatic, no defense that her own bench has accidentally made more effective by refusing to force it to account for her, no coaching staff asking her to accept a role that undersells what the film proves she is capable of. That is the Indiana Fever in 2026.
There is a system being built in Indianapolis that is designed around exactly what Clark does best: pushing pace, finding cutters before they have fully completed their cut, pulling defenders out to the arc, and creating gaps that most players don't even see yet, threading passes through windows that close before most decision-makers have processed that the window was ever open. The Fever are not managing her minutes so that the rotation stays balanced and everyone gets their moment. They are constructing something around her, a system, an identity, an entire offensive structure built on the premise that the most dangerous thing you can do with Caitlin Clark is let her play the game the way the film shows she is capable of playing it. Puerto Rico didn't reveal a problem with Clark. Puerto Rico was the most complete case study yet of what happens when she is used incorrectly, and simultaneously what she can still produce even when the environment is working against her. The Senegal game was what correct usage looks like: 5 records, 12 assists, 0 turnovers. The entire offense clicking because the ball was moving through her hands and defenses were being forced to make uncomfortable choices on every possession. The people who worked hardest in Puerto Rico to limit what Clark could do, the coaching staff that left her off the starting lineup, the teammates who chose not to involve her, the defensive scheme built specifically around neutralizing her, they ended up making the strongest possible argument for why Indianapolis is exactly where she belongs. Because in Indianapolis, nobody is trying to limit her. In Indianapolis, the whole point is to find out what happens when you don't. The 2026 WNBA season is building towards something the defenses at any level are not fully prepared for. The matchup problems Clark creates when the system is designed to use her correctly, when the spacing is built around her range, when the pace is set at the tempo she operates best at, when the ball movement is structured to force defenders into impossible choices. Those problems do not have clean answers. They have adjustments that lead to other problems. And tracking how teams try to solve those problems and how Clark and the Fever respond is going to be one of the most compelling basketball stories of the next 12 months. Puerto Rico showed you what the limitations looked like when the environment was wrong. Indianapolis is going to show you what the ceiling looks like when everything is right. And based on what the film from Puerto Rico is already showing, even with every possible disadvantage working against her, that ceiling is somewhere most people haven't started imagining yet.